Thanks for joining us. This will be part 2 of our 2-part series from our ride from Bakersfield to Wasco. We took a little break in the city of Shafter to gas up and get ready for the next portion from Shafter to Wasco. As we get prepared to ride here, I spent a lot of time in this little town, especially when I was visiting my grandmother in Wasco when I was a kid. If you watched my last video, you remember that I was talking about stopping at my cousin's barbershop. We decided to turn around and get some gas at this gas station, and then we're going to go ahead and motor on. A couple of the memories I remember about this town, and kind of funny, they're not really memories about this town, but about things that we did in this town. And one of them was staying at my cousin's house, and I had 5 cousins living in that house with my aunt and my uncle, and they lived kind of out in the rural area. Beside the barbershop they owned in town, they also owned some land behind their house where they grew things like almonds and probably other crops. I remember at night it would get really super dark, and obviously we're out in the middle of the fields, and so there wasn't really a whole lot of light around there. And when the sun would go down, it would be pitch black pretty much out there. It was kind of spooky sometimes, but one of the things that was the spookiest, it was my first chance to watch the movie The Exorcist. I think I was about 9 years old, and I watched the entire thing not really knowing what it was really about. And when I'd finished the movie, it kind of changed my life forever. The first thing I can say, it scared the hell out of me. And I think I probably started going to church after that, even more so than I was before. But the other thing is I literally could not eat for about a week. Something physically changed inside of me, and it just had some sort of really just emotional effect. Well, the funny thing that also happened is also probably spurred on my love of horror movies, which I can't seem to get enough of anymore. A little about the history of the city of Shafter. As Wikipedia states, it originally began as a loading dock for the Santa Fe Railroad, and originally was named after General William Rufus Shafter, who commanded the U.S. forces in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. The city's property was originally sold in 1914, and the city was eventually incorporated in 1938. The city is currently home to about 21,000 residents and sits about 18 miles northwest of Bakersfield, California. A few notable things about the city of Shafter is that it is home to the Minter Airfield, which began operations in 1941 and was used heavily during World War II. If you look to the right, there's a yellow building, and that is the Shafter Depot Museum, which houses the old Santa Fe passenger and freight depot. I've never been there, but I'd like to go someday. A few of the fond memories I still have about this town is hanging out with my cousins, and whether we were playing Atari 2600 in their bedroom, and believe me, that was the first time I got to experience something like that. I'd never seen a console like that before, and once we started playing it, even though it was just little blocks on the screen, man, I was hooked. I think that's probably what also spurred on my love of retro games, being that I grew up in the 80s. Another thing that we used to do is hang out at the pool here in Shafter. I think there was a pool at one of the parks that we used to go to, and also hanging out at the baseball fields. All my cousins played baseball for their schools at one point or another. I was kind of the odd man out, not really being into sports at all. I'm pretty sure they thought it was weird that I didn't have a team or anything like that, and I didn't root for anybody. And I still really don't. I'm just really not into sports, and I don't know why. I always feel inadequate when I go to places where people are watching football games and stuff. And I really don't even know what's going on, nor do I really pay attention to it. My dad had a love of basketball mostly, I would have to say, and he also liked football as well. The Raiders were his football team, and the Lakers was his basketball team. I remember him taking us to the Forum one time to go see, I guess it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar speak. Maybe he was retiring at some point, and I remember him standing up at a podium and lifting up his jersey in the air. But that's about all I remember from that kind of time period. If you're still with me and you're watching this, you're probably wondering what kind of things they do in this town. Well, I would have to say you're probably either in agriculture or you're probably into oil, one or the other. I would say for this town specifically, probably more into ag. I'm still having issues with my camera mount. It kind of wants to point down, and I literally have to look almost a little bit higher than straight ahead for it to shoot anything other than the road. This final turn was one I'm very familiar with. Coming into the city of Wasco every year for I don't know how many of dozens of years, spending time with my family, this turn would always signify the fact that we were getting close to town. Being that I'm editing this video here, Christmas of 2023, I have a little Christmas story to remember, and that was driving from my house in Bakersfield to the city of Wasco to go visit my grandmother for Christmas. Bakersfield is known for getting this tooly fog, and sometimes it gets so bad you can't literally see 5 feet in front of you. And I remember that was one of those days. I remember it was Christmas Eve, and I was driving down this road and literally could not see the lines in the road. And I ended up having to open up my door and dangerously look down to the ground to find out where the lines are at. When I was a kid, I remember my grandfather owned a little bit of land right here just to the right of us. And I remember as a kid getting to ride my dad's Honda Trail 70 and wiping out my first time coming around a corner, lost control. Another thing we did when we were kids hanging out here during the summers is we would walk out to these fields here to the right, and they'd have a bunch of these reservoirs holding water. So we would go back to my grandmother's house and make these nets, and we'd come out here and catch tadpoles. I don't remember what we did with them, but that's what we did. One thing I touched upon in my last video was that this very area that we're looking at is kind of the central hub for high-speed rail. Why California decided this very place to start high-speed rail is beyond me. You would think they would have started in San Francisco, maybe Los Angeles, maybe even Sacramento. So in just a moment, if you look to your right, you're going to see the structures that they've built for the rail to cross over. And there you can see them there. That is all that's been built so far, and there's a couple that I've seen in Fresno. So this is becoming the infamous train to nowhere. And from what I understand, I don't even think a lot of the land that needs to be purchased for this train to run through has been purchased yet. Maybe hundreds of years from now, people will come out to see this and they'll think it was like maybe California's version of Stonehenge. I remember kind of another story from the 70s. Back in the day, my dad used to own a 1974 Chevy Cheyenne long bed 4x4, and we used to bring that truck up here for visits with my grandmother, and we would drive it from the Los Angeles area up here to Wasco. The story goes from the day that my dad bought that truck from Don Steve Chevrolet, I believe it was in Whittier. He wasn't happy with the power. I don't remember what the size of the engine was. I just remember that he wasn't happy with the output, and I guess he was kind of having regrets about choosing a smaller engine. And it just so happens he had befriended some race car guys down the street, and they were building drag cars all the time. Apparently, they had talked my dad into, unbeknownst to my mom, and boy was she pissed when she found out about it, but they talked him into swapping his brand new engine out, course, brand new engine with almost no miles on it and a full warranty, for one of their custom jobbers. And I believe they ended up building him maybe a small black Chevy. I don't remember exactly what they built him, but I'm pretty sure it was used with really old, worn out race parts, because eventually we came up here to visit my grandmother and the crank broke in half up the Grapevine. Luckily, my grandmother's neighbor, he was an engine builder, and he built my dad another engine for that truck, and I think that one lasted until he basically sold it. So now that we're cruising around Wasco, I can go into a little bit of history about this town. So this town is the town where most of my family originates from, and my mom grew up here. She went to high school here. All of her sisters went to school here, and my grandmother lived just down the street off to the right here. Originally named Dewey'sville in honor of Admiral Dewey, a hero of the Spanish-American War, it eventually changed its name to Wasco in 1907. Wasco, California is currently home to around 28,000 residents, and it also is the headquarters of the Tejon Indian Tribe of California. One of the many exports out of Wasco, besides agriculture, is roses. And from what I understand, many of the roses that are featured in the Rose Parade in Pasadena every year, in fact, it's coming up in about a week, do come from Glasgow, California. If I'm not mistaken, every year in September, this town celebrates its Rose Festival. In fact, when I had a car club, I used to bring all the Volkswagens of my car club out here, and we would participate in the parade. Right up here on your right-hand side, you're going to see some really colorful trees. Well, this is Barker Park. We spent a lot of time here during those hot summer months in that public pool. I think it was like 35 cents to get in for the day. We had a lot of good fun there. And then right up here, we're going to be turning right on this road here. Across the street, you're going to see a large baseball park there. So this is where a lot of the schools would run their baseball games, as well as different leagues. And during the weekends, we used to take our baseball gear there and we used to play around on that field. I remember spending many summer nights up there in those covered bleachers off to your left while my cousins played baseball for their schools. The gray building off to your right there is the old hall for the Public Parks and Rec for Wasco. Our family would use that facility for many receptions, whether they were wedding receptions or funeral receptions, sometimes large birthdays. Looks like they're doing some road work right now, but we're just going to cruise through here leisurely, trying to keep the noise level down, trying not to upset any cars with the alarms or anything like that. It's funny, these towns here, they change a lot, but then technically, when you come back here 20 years later, they don't look any different. There's, for instance, like the house there across on the left, you see a lot of new houses kind of come up, and they don't look anything like the houses that were already here. So the town is kind of growing and changing a little bit at a time, but it always makes you wonder, how long does that process take? Or does the town just kind of stay in this perpetual state of 1950s, 1940s? We're going to go ahead and make a right turn on this main drag here, and so this is where the high school is there to the left. It's the high school my mother went to, and I kind of drive through this town here, and I can kind of see all the past things that I used to deal with when I used to stay here for a month at a time during summer. Like the hall there across the left, I think that was the hall that we celebrated one of my grandmother's birthdays at. And then we've got, I've got an aunt that lives right down that street right there to the right. When I was a kid, I was working on my brother's bicycle and we were going to ride to my uncle's house. And there's not too much I remember about that day. Basically, something happened with the chain and it got locked up, and I went over the handlebars, landed on my head, and had a big grapefruit-sized bump on the back of my head. Well, that medical building there on the right is where they took me to and had all kinds of x-rays and things done. Now, there's a building on the left-hand side that has like a black fascia to it. That used to be a drugstore, and I used to go to that little drugstore, and they had a really cool little like model section where you can buy models. And I come back to my grandmother's house and put them together with what little glue and paint I had. So that was kind of a really nice memory. One of my aunts worked at the insurance company there on the right-hand side. And then we're going to go ahead and go through this little downtown portion. Usually at night it's decorated really nicely with all the little Christmas lights. And because right now, obviously, even though this was taken before Christmas, and I'm editing today on Christmas Day, I remember this little area of town used to look really pretty. And these businesses are obviously not the same businesses that were here when I was growing up. But if you take a look on the left-hand side, you're going to see some red sort of tile around that building. My uncle used to run his photo lab out of that place, and he was called the Photo Doc. And he was in business for a while, eventually closed it up. I remember we used to always talk about the advent of digital cameras, and he says, nah, digital cameras are not good. You want to stick with the old SLR stuff. Eventually, I think we're all using digital cameras now. And so this is a little part of town I've always liked. It's a little roundabout. And so we're going to go ahead and turn around here and kind of go back. Down this street over here, there was a little arcade that we used to go to back in the 80s, and they had a lot of retro. Well, back then they were not retro. Those were actually the real games of those days. And so we used to spend a lot of time in there. We'd get a couple of quarters together and we'd just go play video games all day. Eventually it closed up, and I don't know what they're doing there now, but yeah, see, there's the red tile photo doc building, we used to call it. I think it's a church now. And then we're going to turn right up here and go up the street. That little yellow building off to the left, that's where the video arcade used to be. Now it looks like it's a wedding shop or something like that. Man, this town just brings back so many memories. You know, back in the day, this town was a pretty safe town. I understand it's not as safe anymore, but we used to be able to run around here sun up till sundown, no problem at all, and be very safe about it. And just kids just kind of just messing around all day on our bikes, not really getting in trouble, but, you know, getting into stuff, if you will. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go head over to Highway 46 and see if we can get some coffee or something, maybe a bite to eat. We're just going to ride through a couple little streets here to see if we can find ourselves a nice street light that'll lead us on to 46. This is Highway 46 coming up here, so we're going to make a left on here, try to find something to eat. Joe's asking if my turn signals are self-canceling, and I believe they are, but sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and I guess it just depends on how much you have the handlebars turned. So Highway 46 will actually go all the way to Highway 101 through the city of Paso Robles, and if you're familiar with it, it was commonly referred to as Blood Alley because of the two-lane nature of the road. The danger came from the fact when many cars would try to pass other cars and get hit head-on from the opposite lane. Now they've moved the road to 2 lanes in many places, so they're a lot safer. And if you know the area, you'll know that there are several different James Dean's memorials because it is believed that is where, very close to that area, is where his fatal crash happened, as he was driving his Porsche 550 Speedster to a race in Northern California. Well, I want to thank you guys for taking this little trip with me. It brings back a lot of memories, and especially now that both of my parents are gone and a lot of my family is gone. You know, all we have are these places that we used to frequent in these towns, and it's kind of weird. It's like you show up to a place like this and there's places like this coffee shop that was never here before, But then you go to some areas of town that are a lot older, and it's like ghosts are everywhere, you know? But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you like the video, please give it a like and maybe even subscribe.